and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Appreciate you all being here for this hearing, Security Clearance Reform, the Performance Accountability Council's Path Forward. At last count, the Director of National Intelligence reported 4.5 million people held security clearances, 4.5 million. And the queue for clearances continues to grow. At the end of fiscal year 2015, there were more than 388,000 new background investigations and 117,000 periodic re-investigations backlogged at the Office of Personnel Management. That is a lot of folks with access or requesting access to our most sensitive national security information. And we have learned last year that most, if not all, the personal information collected during background investigations was exfiltrated in one of our country's biggest cyber attacks. We have to be careful not to ever allow that to happen again. We have to fix the process, and we have to protect the information we collect. And as part of my opening statement, I'd actually like to yield some time to the gentleman from Oklahoma who's been very keenly involved in this, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do appreciate the panel also being here today. Following the June 2015 OPM data breach, I began working with my good friend and colleague, Congressman Ted Lieu, on a path forward that would protect not just the personal and private information of those who hold security clearances, but what amounts to crown jewels for any foreign intelligence service. My concern deepened as we learned the full extent of the breach. All told, 18 million records were stolen in the breach, including data on military and intelligence personnel, placing Americans at great risk that has not abated. I also received a letter from my time in the service, being a former top-secret SCI clearance holder in the military, stating that my data had been compromised. For me and my friend, Congressman Ted Lieu, who also received a letter, this is not some academic issue. It should also be noted that the DoD never lost security of such data when it was under their care. It was through pressure, largely from Congress, to save money, make an effort to eliminate a large backlog. Well, we eliminated the backlog by eliminating security. Whatever savings we had has surely been forfeited in that result. Today, we will examine the reform efforts advanced by the 90-day Sustainability and Security Review by, or PAC, the review by the Performance Accountability Council, or PAC. One of the main points of emphasis I made along with Mr. Lieu was the need for the Department of Defense to own the data for our service members and department civilians, and I'm encouraged that the PAC review will result in this being accomplished. Under the reforms recommended by the PAC, the Department of Defense will be responsible for not just building the infrastructure that will house this critically important data, they will also be responsible for defending it. The questions remain, however, that while the DoD has been given the responsibility, will they be given the authority while being placed under a bureau that is placed under a department? This has to be answered. I remain concerned regarding the creation of the new National Background Investigations Bureau, or NBIB. NBIB will ultimately absorb the Federal Investigative Service, which currently is tasked with conducting background investigations for the vast majority of our government. And while I believe we all recognize the pressing importance and urgency of modernizing and updating the security clearance process, I remain unconvinced that allowing an OPM entity, whether its name be FIS or NBIB, is the correct path in the long term. After all, the OPM allowed the worst breach of secure data in our nation's history. I hope that today's hearing will show why NBIB will be a new way forward rather than just a rebranding of FIS. I appreciate the willingness of Acting Director Colbert and other members of the PAC that they have shown in working with me and Congressman Lieu on this issue, and your willingness to give us complete access and answer our questions. My aim in this hearing, as I hope we will hear today with the Chairman's indulgence, is to ensure that the process forward for NBIB is the right path, and that we are not just putting a fresh coat of paint on a house with a bad foundation, a house that our enemies have broken into and stolen everything in it, I might add. I look forward to hearing from our panel of witnesses as we seek to understand the difference between NBIB and its predecessor, as well as the role of the Department of Defense in protecting this vital information. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. In the essence of time, I will submit the remainder of my opening statement into the record. We'll now recognize the ranking member, the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding today's hearing. I commend both Congressman Liu and Russell for their work on this issue and for requesting today's hearing. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cummings, for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I want to thank the Chair and the Ranking Member for holding this hearing, as well as last year's hearings that expose fundamental weaknesses in our nation's cybersecurity, particularly as applied to OPM. And last year's OPM data breach was the most significant government cybersecurity breach we have ever uncovered, and serves as a poignant reminder that the U.S. government needs to change the culture of cybersecurity. It also revealed that there was an irrational system where we had a human resources agency protecting these critical national security assets or security clearance records. And as Representative Russell mentioned, not only did we both get notices that our information was compromised, I think our spouses did as well. In October 7th of last year, Congressman Russell and I wrote a letter to the administration. It was to the Performance Accountability Council, requesting that you transfer the security clearance data, the protection and design of it, to a Department of Defense agency. The letter was dated October 7th, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter it into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I am pleased that the administration and the PAC board has, in fact, now put forward a plan that will transfer the design and protection of this information to a DoD agency. I do share the same concerns that Congressman Russell has regarding the NBIB. I would like to know why it is we need the creation of a new bureau, how it would be different from the Federal Information Service, and whether the lines of authority are clear and if there's going to be accountability. And I agree with Congressman Russell that we need to hear about how these reforms are not just going to be window dressing on a broken home, but a comprehensive renovation. And let me again thank the witnesses here today for your public service, for your hard work on this issue, and look forward to working with you to make our nation's cybersecurity stronger.
Again, I want to thank Representative Liu and Representative Russell for their leadership on this issue. And, Mr. Chairman, this is precisely the type of hearing our committee should be having, looking across agencies at new proposals to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of government. Mr. Chairman, in 2013, a very disturbed Navy contractor with a security clearance shot and killed 12 people and injured 4 others here in Washington, D.C. Our committee conducted an investigation of that terrible shooting, and we found that a contractor, USIS, conducted the shooter's background check. We found that USIS failed to include information on his previous arrest for shooting out the tires of his neighbor's car. As a result, he was given a secret-level security clearance. We also found that USIS committed fraud against the American taxpayers on a much wider scale by submitting incomplete background investigations. USIS ultimately agreed to the demands of the Justice Department to forego $30 million as a result of its actions, and it no longer conducts background checks. Sent the report I issued on this topic be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then last year, cyber attackers successfully breached OPM's data systems. Again, our committee investigated, and again, we found a weak link in the chain, a contractor. We heard testimony explaining that these cyber attackers were able to gain access to federal systems by using key points privileged access to OPM's networks. As a result, the personal information of millions of federal employees with security clearances was compromised. These cyber attacks on OPM were not isolated incidents. Other federal contractors, including AFM and Primera, were also attacked. Experts believe these were all part of a sophisticated coordinated cyber espionage campaign. They all occurred at about the same time. They all targeted sensitive information about federal employees, and they all were carried out using similar malware. The proposal we are discussing today is a significant and substantive response to these events. And it is more than just the new National Background Investigations Bureau. The administration's proposal leverages the expertise of key parts of the government, like the Department of Defense, to provide critical IT and cybersecurity capabilities. I believe this is a serious effort to combat sophisticated cyber attackers who are targeting our government, and it deserves serious consideration by this Congress. Today, I want to hear more about how this proposal will address the significant problems we have had with these contractors. The government's reliance on contractors helps supplement the workforce and increase our capabilities, but as we have seen, it also carries major risks. I want to know how the administration's proposal will increase oversight and accountability over contractors charged with safeguarding some of our nation's most sensitive information. Let me address two final points. First, earlier this week, Donna Seymour, OPM's Chief Information Officer, retired after more than 35 years of service to our great country. Unfortunately, some have inaccurately blamed Ms. Seymour for pre-existing vulnerabilities she inherited. Now, I was one of the most vocal critics of the CIO's office at our last hearing because the Inspector General raised concerns about obtaining access to information from that office. And I continue to believe those concerns were valid. However, our investigation has now found that the cyber attacks against OPM were already underway when Ms. Seymour took office in December of 2013. In addition, experts in and out of the agency informed us that she helped uncover the attack, she led an aggressive response, and she elevated cybersecurity to a top priority when previously it had languished. Finally, Mr. Chairman, so I want you to know that I believe that these recent political attacks against Ms. Seymour are both unfair and inaccurate. They also set a terrible precedent that will discourage qualified experts from taking on the challenges our nation faces in the future. Finally, on that same note, as we sit here today, certain Republicans in the Senate are holding up the nomination of a great public servant, Beth Cobert, as OPM director for political reasons that have nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with her qualifications for the position. As we all know, Republicans are threatening to block anyone the President nominates to the Supreme Court for political reasons. In the same way, they are stalling Ms. Cobert's nomination despite the fact that she has been widely praised for turning things around at the agency. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We must not only reach common ground, we must reach higher ground. And that is what the American people are demanding of us, and that is why they are so frustrated. Just this morning, Senator David Vitter issued a press release proclaiming that, and I quote, he is blocking Beth Cobert to be director of the Office of Personnel Management, end of quote, as if he's bragging about it. He's doing this because of his political opposition to the Affordable Care Act and not for anything relating to the actions of Ms. Cobert. I have a copy of the press release here, and I ask unanimous consent that it be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
That objection.
As I close, this is simply outrageous. The Inspector General has praised her efforts, and even some of her critics in Congress have praised her leadership. There's absolutely no reason to continue playing politics, and I hope that every member of our committee will join me today in asking the Senate to confirm President Obama's nomination for this position as soon as possible. Mr. Chairman, again, I want to thank you for your indulgence. I want to thank you for calling this very important hearing, and I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. And as we introduce this first panel of witnesses, I want to particularly thank Ms. Cobert, who's been nominated by the President to be the new Director of the Office of Personnel Management. I find her to be a very competent person who is a breath of fresh air, who actually has the background to run this agency. Part of the reason we got into this mess, since you brought it up, to the business running the Office of Personnel Management, she was terribly underqualified to do this. And I am glad that the agency has taken action to get rid of what I consider to be one of the worst problems, which was their CIO. Because not only there were undoubtedly problems, but that was, in my personal opinion, not part of the solution. Now, that has been taken care of, and we can further debate that. That's not the subject of the hearing today. What I appreciate is the communication from Ms. Cobert. I think she has, as I said, the right background. We do still need some responsiveness relating to a subpoena, but I do believe that the Office of Personnel Management is making an effort to get that information to us. I want to be one that's counted as supporting her nomination, and I think the country will be better off, the government will be better off, confirming her presence and allowing her to be the director, fully confirmed as soon as possible.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield for just 30 seconds?
Yes.
Would you join me in a letter today to send to Congressman Cobert, Congressman Vitter, saying what you just said?
I will send one to the majority leader.
All right, that'll do.
I don't want to send one to a specific.
Fine,
but
I would appreciate
I am
that.
saying it publicly. I will put it in writing. I believe Ms. Cobert has the right qualifications. I think the country and the office will be better off with her confirmation.
I just wanted to make sure we did it together if we can.
And so that's quite the introduction to joining us here today. We do appreciate your presence and your expertise, and look forward to hearing how we move forward. But again, I'm glad that there have been changes in the CIO's office. That is part of the solution and gets rid of the problem. We have also Mr. Terry Halverson, who's the Chief Information Officer at the United States Department of Defense. Welcome here, sir. Thank you. Mr. Tony Scott, Deputy Director for Management at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. We appreciate your presence as well. And Mr. William Evanina, did I pronounce that? Yes, I hope so. Thank you. The Director of National Counterintelligence and Security Center at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. We appreciate your presence as well. All of these panel members have very important critical roles to the safety and security of our nation. We thank you for participating. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. So if you will all please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Witnesses may be seated. Let the record reflect that all of them answered in the affirmative. And in order to allow time for robust discussion and questioning by members, we would appreciate it if you would limit your verbal comments to 5 minutes. Your entire written record will be submitted into the record. Ms. Cobert, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Sorry. Microphone there. Yeah, thank you.
Get that right. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. This year, the administration announced significant changes to how the federal government performs background investigations. As a result, OPM will stand up the National Background Investigations Bureau, NBIB. The NBIB will absorb the operations of OPM's federal investigative services and will be housed within OPM. The NBIB will be a new government-wide service provider for background investigations. OPM has and will work closely with our interagency partners on this effort that is so critical to the integrity of the federal workforce and our national security. The NBIB presents significant change for the federal government in a number of important and positive ways. DoD will design, build, and operate the NBIB's investigative IT systems in coordination with the NBIB. This strengthens the federal government's security clearance and background investigation processes by leveraging DoD's significant IT, national security, and cybersecurity expertise. NBIB will also have elevated standing and prominence within the national security leadership across the government. The head of NBIB will be a presidential appointee and a full member of the Suitability and Security Clearance Performance Accountability Council, the PAC. Additionally, NBIB will have its own dedicated structures in vital areas of operations tailored to NBIB's core mission. Finally, we will institutionalize NBIB's ability to tap into the rich expertise and knowledge that exists across the federal government through locating the leadership team in Washington, D.C., and utilizing programs such as rotating details and joint duty assignments. OPM plays an important role in conducting background investigations for the vast majority of the federal government. Currently, OPM's Federal Investigative Services conducts investigations for over 100 federal agencies, approximately 95% of the total background investigations government-wide, including more than 600,000 national security investigations and 400,000 investigations related to suitability, fitness, or credentialing each year. The NBIB will assume the investigative functions of OPM's Federal Investigative Services and add important new capabilities. The NBIB will concentrate solely on its mission to provide effective, efficient, and secure background investigations for the federal government. The NBIB will receive dedicated support in key areas, including acquisition and privacy, and will focus on bringing in additional talent with national security expertise as we do so. To begin the implementation phase of these reforms, we are establishing a transition team. This team, comprised of personnel from the PAC member agencies, will be established by mid-March. Supporting the implementation of the NBIB and aiding its success will be a core focus for the PAC. The NBIB will leverage existing expertise, resources, and processes for providing government-wide services as it is launched. The NBIB will work closely with OPM's Federal Investigative Services leadership to minimize disruption for agencies that rely on us to perform background investigations. We are working along with DoD to establish an initial transition schedule to sunset the OPM IT systems currently supporting background investigations. Throughout these efforts, we will provide continuity of service to our customer agencies by providing quality background investigation services. Our goal is to have the NBIB's initial operating capability officially established with a new organizational design and a leader in place by October 2016. The establishment of the NBIB continues this administration's work to protect American citizens and some of our nation's most sensitive information and facilities. On behalf of OPM, I am proud to be part of this most recent effort by the administration. I look forward to working with my colleagues on this panel, with our customer and partner agencies across the federal government, and with this Congress in a bipartisan, collaborative fashion for the benefit of the American people. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Halverson, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before the committee today on DoD's information technology and cybersecurity support to the National Background Investigation Bureau. In DoD capacity, I look forward to expanding this role with the opportunity to oversee IT systems for the National Background Investigation Bureau. This is an opportunity for the federal government to truly capitalize on established DoD technology, commercial expertise, other government expertise to improve the security of the IT infrastructure for the vital federal background investigation system process. DoD has substantial experience in the development of systems with strong cybersecurity and has worked to integrate commercial and government-developed cyber defense and detection tools into the DoD networks. This gives the Department unique cyber defense capabilities. DoD is driving cultural, business, and technical innovation into DoD by better integrating our IT infrastructure, supporting agile and innovative IT. We will do the same here. The Department's cybersecurity workforce is well trained to protect against and the Department's objective, of course, is to replace the current background investigation information system with a new, more reliable, flexible, and secure system in support of the NBIB while we ensure continuous operations for the vital background investigation systems and ensure that we are making as much security improvements to the current systems while we're in the process of replacing them. I echo Beth's comments. We have been working closely together with OPM IT infrastructure. I will stress again, we will do this in cooperation with everyone, but in the end, DOD has the technical responsibility and the technical expertise to oversight what we are doing in this new IT investigation system. Thank you, and stand by for your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, I incorrectly identified your title. You're actually the U.S. Chief Information Officer. My apologies for that. But you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz. I was grateful for the promotion, but my boss would probably be angry about that. So Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak about the administration's recently announced changes to modernize and strengthen how the federal government performs and safeguards background investigations for its employees and contractors. As you know, the federal government issues, handles, and stores important and sensitive data. And we use this data to conduct critical government functions, one of which is the subject of today's hearing, the federal government's background investigations process. As we all know, as technology evolves and our economy becomes more digitally connected, the federal government's tools, systems, and processes for managing sensitive data and for conducting background investigations must also evolve. And to protect the personal data of our employees and citizens, we must keep pace with the technology advancements that occur in order to anticipate, detect, and counter external and internal attempts to breach government systems. In my role as Federal Chief Information Officer, I'm particularly concerned with confronting the unyielding cybersecurity threats posed to the information technology systems used across the federal government. My team is responsible for developing and overseeing the implementation of federal IT policy through a variety of responsibilities. Today, I'll focus on the administration's response to increasing cybersecurity threats and actions we are taking to improve the government's background investigation process through the establishment of the new National Background Investigations Bureau, or NBIB. In 2008, the Interagency Suitability and Security Clearance Performance Accountability Council, or the PAC, as we call it, was established through an executive order. The PAC is convened and chaired by the Office of Management and Budget and consists of the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, and the Departments of Defense, Treasury, Homeland Security, State, Justice, and Energy, and the FBI, among other agencies. The PAC oversees reforms to the process, or to the processes on which federal agencies and the public rely to ensure that federal employees, contractors, and members of the armed forces are suitable for employment and can be trusted with access to facilities and sensitive information. As Beth mentioned, the administration will establish a new federal entity, the National Background Investigations Bureau, to modernize and strengthen the government's background investigation processes. That will include organizational redesign led by a political appointee who will be a full member of the PAC. It will include re-engineering efforts to look at underlying business processes. DOD will design, build, secure, and operate NBIB's IT. This will leverage DOD's expertise in IT and cybersecurity while better protecting sensitive information, and will deploy the fullest security resources against increasingly sophisticated and evolving threats. To support this work, the President's FY17 budget includes $95 million within DOD's top line that will be dedicated to the development of these IT capabilities. The PAC will establish an interagency cybersecurity advisory group to provide advice and counsel on system development and threat mitigation. And these efforts are consistent with OMB's direction to all federal agencies to modernize their IT systems to adequately secure mission functions, systems, and information. And a dedicated privacy official will be appointed to advance privacy by design as new processes and systems are developed. More broadly, enhanced cybersecurity across all federal agencies will be strengthened by the implementation of the Cybersecurity National Action Plan, or CNAP, which builds on the security measures and initiatives that have been implemented in response to the 2015 cyber incidents. The CNAP takes near-term actions and puts in place a long-term strategy to enhance cybersecurity awareness and protections and begin the long overdue replacement of legacy systems while ensuring privacy and maintaining public safety and economic and national security. We look forward to working with Congress to create a more secure, efficient, and effective federal backgrounds investigations infrastructure. I thank the committee for holding this hearing. I'm pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Evanina, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, first, thanks for having the opportunity to have me representing the intelligence community be here with you as part of this panel and to take part in the formation of the National Background Investigations Bureau and provide an update on substantive reforms and security clearance processes that we have done so far in this effort. As the National Counterintelligence Executive and the Director of the National Counterintelligence Security Center, I have the privilege of working with some of the best and brightest security minds in the United States government. I am honored to share with you the progress we have made with respect to security clearance reforms and raising awareness throughout the United States government on the potential security threats resulting from multiple breaches and the theft of personally identifiable information known as PII. The Director of National Intelligence is the principal member of the PAC, and I act on his behalf in this role. On behalf of the intelligence community, the ODNI strongly endorses this plan to create the National Background Investigations Bureau and leverage the Department of Defense's all their skills, abilities, tools, and techniques to protect the associated systems and data. I am committed to this partnership with the NBIB and will continue our holistic and collective approach towards successfully implementing new security clearance processes. In accordance with the Intelligence Reform, Terrorism Protection Act and Executive Order 13467, the Security Executive Agent is responsible for directing the oversight of investigations and determinations of eligibility for access to classified information or to hold sensitive positions rendered by any executive branch, department, or agency. These authorities also give the DNI responsibilities to develop uniform and consistent policies and procedures and to ensure the effective, efficient, and timely completion of investigations and adjudications. We've been working diligently to establish a policy framework and infrastructure for robust engagement on national security processes across the U.S. government. I've included examples of governance, policy, and standards in my statement for the record. However, I'd like to highlight just a few here today. In October 2013, the DNI issued executive correspondence directing agencies to review and validate whether employees or contractors actually require eligibility for access to classified information. This effort resulted in a reduction of clearance holders by approximately 18% across the United States government. This effort continues today. In June of 2015, the DNI issued correspondence on implementation of continuous evaluation, providing executive branch agencies direction in reevaluating clearance holders on a more frequent and automated basis. And in June of 2015, OPM and ODNI issued their first joint regulation on designating national security positions, which standardized this process across the entire government. In my role as a National Counterintelligence Executive and a Director of NCSC, I have been emphasizing the benefits of merging counterintelligence and security because we know they are stronger together. This partnership provides the enhanced ability to both identify threats posed by foreign adversaries and at the same time enact security measures to mitigate those threats. NCSC is actively reviewing and assessing all threats posed by foreign adversaries, including those related to cyber breaches and theft of PII. Specific to the theft of PII over the past few years, NCSC initiated a comprehensive national counterintelligence and awareness campaign to educate those impacted, like members here in this panel, by the breach that happened last year, including former government employees and former contractors and their families. This past September, my office began releasing educational awareness videos and materials through our website, ncsc.gov, and actively engaging with all departments and agencies on such topics as spearfishing, social media deception, and human targeting. We are in the process of releasing a 4th video on travel awareness. To date, the campaign has reached over 330 organizations to include over 100 U.S. government departments and agencies, private sector groups, and cleared industry. I or my staff have participated in over 15 briefings and hearings to multiple committees to address CI and security applications of all breaches that have occurred in the last few years. Additionally, NCSC has provided briefings to well over 150 Senate, House staff, and Senate staff to provide tools to mitigate such threats for themselves, their families, their members, and constituents. We continue to explore every possible avenue to maximize distribution of the campaign materials. We're currently partnering with DHS and the White House using social media and private sector engagements. NCSC, leading the entire intelligence community, continues to provide enhanced awareness to individuals victimized by the recent breaches and provide mitigation strategies to thwart potential foreign adversaries. In conclusion, NCSC values our robust partnership with OPM, OMB, and DoD, and other PAC stakeholders in this committed endeavor. Together, we will continue to take our necessary steps to enhance government-wide policies and procedures in securing our systems and our data. Once again, I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide an update on security clearance reforms, formation of the MBIB, and NCSC's efforts to mitigate the impact of all the breaches, and specifically with respect to PII. We look forward to working with your committee and the rest of Congress, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Cobert, we have some outstanding document requests. When will we get those? Microphone, please.
Get this right, I apologize. We are continuing to work through those. I know we made a delivery of significant number of documents by the date of the subpoena, and we are working with your office to prioritize those. We are working to get them to you as fast as we can.
And I would hope that the ranking member would also join us in those document requests.
I will.
Thank you. I want to talk about social media. Ms. Cobert, will all agencies look at social media for those applying for security clearances?
Thank you, Congressman. Let me start, and I think
we don't have much time.
okay. We are in the process working with the DNI.
Why wouldn't you look at social media?
In looking at social media, we want to make sure that we are looking at it in a way that is effective, that brings insight to the process, that reflects what's in that information, and it's done in an appropriate and systematic way. And that's the new policies that we are working to put in place.
Will you require that each person applying for a security clearance provide their online identities to you?
The specifics of the social media policy are ones we are working through with the DNI as the security executive agent. They set the policies that we follow.
Okay, Mr. Evanina, why the hesitation on providing social media information?
Sir, there is no hesitation. We've been working robustly the last few years with the Department of Defense to enact, I think, what we believe to be a robust policy on.
So what is the policy in short?
Well, the policy in short is utilization of social media to enact investigations and adjudications of individuals who request a security clearance, and that's in the process as we speak.
Do you require anybody seeking a security clearance to provide their online identities?
Well, not at this point right now, but through the pilots we have issued throughout the government and DoD.
This is my frustration. You've been working on this for years, and you haven't yet implemented a policy that requires them to identify their online identities. How hard is that? It's a one-sentence question.
Well, I think the difficulty begins when you have the mixture of executive branch organizations, and currently right now the issues are multifaceted. It involves the utilization of privacy issues.
What privacy issue do you have? By its very definition, social media means you're not being private.
I concur, sir, but the issue is getting past the password and having authority granted or waiver to get through the password to get the information which is in the social media.
So we're going to grant them a security clearance to access the information of the United States of America, information that can't be shared to the public, and they won't share their information with you?
I hope not.
Well, when are you going to have this policy done?
Well, the policy is currently out of the ODNI and it is in coordination with the rest of the executive branch of the government.
When is it going to be done? Who's in charge of this?
Currently-
Who do we call to this committee to explain this to us?
It's currently with the Office of Management and Budget for coordination.
Okay, Mr. Scott, where are we at with this?
I don't know, but I will find out and get
And
back to you.
you're the, I didn't get it right, Chief Information Officer for the, I'm sorry, the Chief Information Officer for the United States of America.
I just don't know today where we're at on that particular
This is the
policy,
this
but
is the
I will
cluster.
find out and get back to you.
This is the cluster that is the federal government. This should be such a simple question. It should be on your form. Show us all your online identities. And then as we're doing a background investigation, how can you not go look at their Facebook page or their Twitter posts or their Instagram or Snapchat or any of the other ones? We don't do that? How moronic are we? I mean, come on. My 14-year-old could figure this out. What's the hesitation? Yeah, this is the problem. It's just silent. I was planning to take 20 seconds on this question, and we should probably do an entire hearing on how we don't look at the social media of people. We give top secret clearance. We're showing people, we're putting people's lives in danger. And we can't go online and look at their social media? All right, I got to keep going, but this is, go hire a bunch of teenagers, they do it better than we're doing it. I mean, they know how to do this stuff, but we don't, as a government, need to do it. ISIS has figured it out. They know how to do it, but we don't seem to do it. All right. With the National Background Investigation Bureau, which Inspector General has jurisdiction? Mr. Halverson?
I don't think a single Inspector General will have jurisdiction. I can assure you that certainly the DODIG, as we build the IT systems, will look at this.
Will you provide access? Will there be any limitations on access for the Inspector General for OPM to look at this?
No, sir. We couldn't do that legally. They have access legally to look at all that, as does the General Accounting Office, and I am sure there will be many committees and offices that will want to have access to this. Legally, they'll be entitled to that, and we will give it to them.
I appreciate it. As the DOD's CIO, are you ultimately going to be responsible for the IT system at the NBIB?
Yes.
And will you report to the director of the NBIB, or will you be able to make IT decisions and overrule the NBIB? Who's in charge?
In the end, DOD is in charge of the technical decisions. But I will stress, we have worked well together with all of the members of this panel. We will continue to coordinate with all of the customers. We will continue to do this in a cooperative way. But in the end, I report to the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense is the biggest customer of the NBIB, and I assure you I don't expect any problems that come up. If they do, I'll take them directly to the Secretary of Defense.
But you're in charge, correct?
I am the accountable official for building this IT system the right way.
I appreciate it. My time has expired. I'll yield now to recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. James Clapper, Director Cobert, the Director of National Intelligence, recently told an audience at the Naval Academy that the #1 threat facing our country is cyber attacks. He said, and I quote, "The cyber threat is here, it's upon us now, and we need the people here today to help us defend our systems and our nation," end of quote. I do appreciate the collaborative interagency approach you all are taking with regard to this proposal. I'd like to know what you're doing to enhance oversight of government contractors, because our investigations have shown that contractors have repeatedly been the weak link in federal cyber security. In the OPM data breach, for instance, cyber attackers first breached Keypoint and then disguised themselves as Keypoint employees to gain access to OPM's background investigation system. Director, what steps are you taking to require Keypoint and other contractors to shore up their IT security?
Thank you, Congressman. Improving our ability to work with our contractors on cybersecurity is a key priority for us at OPM, and I know it is across the executive branch. We have been reviewing the clauses in our contracts and working to ensure that we can make that those have the provisions that we need going forward. There's an effort underway with NIST, with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, to develop standards. One specific example, we are recompeting the field investigation contract this year, the contract under which CACI and Keypoint do that work today. That contract will be recompeted. As we're preparing to recompete that contract, we have been working actively to include those clauses. We've in fact already been working with the Department of Defense to look at the kind of clauses we're going to put in place in that contract to make sure that we can leverage their expertise here as well. So we take this seriously, reviewing the contracts, and that's just one example of how we're moving that forward.
I'm going to come back to those clauses in a minute. But Mr. Scott, what measures is the administration taking to prevent the misuse of federal contractor IT systems to penetrate government IT systems?
Part of our updated guidance that's coming out, Ranking Member Cummings, includes standardized contract language that we expect will be adopted in all the contracts that agencies use for IT. And that's a way of getting consistency and then also being able to measure performance against that.
Well, as you know, another OPM contractor, Anthem, was also breached, and the personnel information of nearly 80 million Americans was compromised, including millions of federal employees. Experts believe these were all part of a sophisticated, coordinated cyber espionage campaign. They all occurred at about the same time. They all targeted sensitive information about federal employees, and they all were carried out using similar malware. Mr. Halverson, does it worry you that our adversaries can target private corporations with relationships to the federal government to obtain sensitive information about federal employees? And how does the administration's proposal improve cybersecurity at Anthem or other government contractors?
Well, it certainly worries me that organizations and governments can target U.S. companies. I think what the administration has done here by allowing DOD to be part of this, we have in DOD already some existing clauses and regulations that require our contracts to highlight cybersecurity. I think everybody at this table, Mr. Scott has certainly been leading an effort to improve federal cybersecurity everywhere, taking those clauses. We partner a lot. Ms. Cobert, as the acting OPM director, has been doing the same thing. So I think we're handling the threat and moving forward in all the right directions to put in the right clauses, the right rules, right things. We're also at DOD working with Mr. Scott, expanding the communications we have with private contractors so that they can do better security on their own and feeding them better intelligence about what the threat is.
After the attack, Anthem did not ask the incident response team at U.S. CERT to investigate. You would think that Anthem, as a government contractor, would be required, and this goes back to these clauses, Director Cobert, would be required to allow a government forensics team in to investigate the theft of government employees' personal information. Director Cobert, why wasn't Anthem under any contractual requirement to report breaches involving government data to U.S. CERT? Why is that?
Congressman, Anthem was under a requirement to report breaches to OPM, to our Situation Room, and we can then work with them on how to respond. I was not there at the time, so I don't know the specifics of that. I know we are having an ongoing set of discussion with Anthem and our other health insurance partners about how to strengthen cybersecurity and how we're going to work with them going forward,
So that is
including
a part,
that possibility.
That's a part of the contract now, though. In other words, the contracts, I take it was in the contract before, they didn't do it. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
No, to the best of my understanding, the obligation in the contract is to report to OPM. Okay. That they did do.
Okay. Now, what about U.S. CERT?
I don't believe that the contract requires them to report to U.S. CERT, but as we're looking at the new contracts and as we're working with all of our health insurance partners, that is one of the options we are exploring.
Good. Good. Would you get back to us on that? Because this, as I said before, this is a, weak link that I think we don't want to miss, particularly when you all are putting things together and trying to tighten up any kind of loopholes. That's something that I would hope that you all would take a look at and get back to us on.
Happy to do that.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma. I appreciate his leadership on this issue, along with Mr. Liu. But we'll now recognize Mr. Russell of Oklahoma for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do thank the panel for being here today and for making every attempt to resolve this situation. However, we've got some problems here. Mr. Scott, who is currently funding the FIS?
I believe that's part of the revolving fund in OPM. Beth could probably answer that.
Okay, so it is, and I'm getting a nod from Ms. Cobert there, so it currently comes out of OPM. And yet, as I heard it stated by you, that this will come, this $95 million to stand up the Bureau will now come from top line of Department of Defense. Why is it that Department of Defense has to pay for it?
This would be added to the DOD budget and give them the funds needed to develop the systems.
Will it come out of OPM's budget?
I don't,
Yeah,
Since
therein lies the problem.
since the FY17 budget isn't a reality yet, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I think we know in principle that if FIS was funded by, OPM, then it just makes good sense that the monies would be transferred. Ms. Colbert, would you like to answer that?
The Federal Investigative Service operates with a revolving fund. The agencies that use those services pay fees for those services. That is the core of FIS's funding, is through the fees that agencies that require background investigations pay for those services. So the funds come from agencies through interagency agreement into OPM. It's a revolving fund, not appropriated funds.
Okay. Well, and that helps somewhat, but here's the problem. And while I agree that DOD is the biggest user, herein lies the overarching problem. We've allowed, out of the necessity of cost saving, of elimination of backlogs, that we got into this situation where 18 million records have been breached. Whatever it was we hoped to gain has absolutely materially aided our enemies for probably 2 or more generations. They will be able to mine incredible data. It does not take a genius to figure that out. And so now, as we're getting ready to set up potentially another house, we want to make sure it's not a house of cards. I have real concerns that this money is coming out of Department of Defense specifically, and here's why. For $95 million, you could have 60,600 soldiers being paid. And we're talking about additional cuts. And so now, because we've had a breach, and now we're going to try to make a bureau, we're going to cut 30,000 soldiers from the Army and further diminish the Marine Corps. I mean, this is the problem. We are weakening our country. We are weakening the Department of Defense. We are weakening whoever might have a security clearance. I don't think that the solution is take it out of top line of Department of Defense, and I will take real issue with that. I also sit on the House Armed Services Committee, and with my background, I am given a little bit of respect and wide berth on those issues. So I am not satisfied with those answers. Here's another one. Responsibility. Okay, I appreciate, Mr. Halverson, all that you do. I do understand it. And you were careful to accurately describe the authority pieces. You said that DOD would be technically in charge, that DOD will be allowed to be a part of this. And I think that's accurate language, but therein, again, lies the problem. When you are in conflict with your recommendations, will you have the final authority to push that through for national security?
Sir, I believe that I will.
Believe?
Yes, sir, and I'll stress again.
But the wiring diagram could conflict with that, does it not? Because now Department of Defense is going to have to go through, the Bureau, who goes through OPM, and then we'll talk about it on the PAC. You may not have that authority. Is that correct?
Sir, I don't think that is correct, and I would say this. The wiring diagram isn't finished, but I will tell you this. Again, I report to the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense has made it very clear to me,
Well, I'm sure he
number one
has.
customer.
But if OPM disagrees with the Secretary of Defense, then we've got a problem, do we not?
If we had that problem, I think we might have a short problem. I don't think in the end, OPM is going to tell
But
the
the
Secretary
wiring
of Defense not to
diagram
build
is
it.
set up potentially for that type of flaw, and this is a problem. One thing I did learn as a soldier, maybe not, it doesn't happen here in Congress, but it certainly did on a battlefield, you have to have unity of effort. And not just unity of effort, you've got to have somebody clearly in charge. And here's my big beef. If the Department of Defense is going to clearly have the greatest level of responsibility to protect these documents, then they, by golly, better have the authority to make it good. And we ought not to be weakening and diminishing our land forces to pay for some data breach. Those monies, we've got to figure out a different way. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I've exceeded my time. Thank you for your indulgence.
I thank the gentleman. We'll recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Cobert, the breach that has occurred into federal employee data is deep indeed. In fact, I would guess that if you worked for a private corporation, much of that data would not be even in the hands of your employer. For example, your spouse's data, your children's data, the kind of data that is appropriate for a government agency. And yet, minimally in the beginning, only $18 million and 18 months and $1 million was allowed in protection. Grateful to the appropriators, it's gone up to 10 years and $5 million. I have a bill for lifetime protection. Isn't it true that much of this information not only regarding the employee, but the employee's family, spouses, children, is unchangeable, cannot be somehow mitigated by making changes in the particular data that the hackers have?
Yes, that is correct, Congresswoman.
To your knowledge, has any use been made of this data to this point?
Congresswoman, we are in continual dialogue with our partners in law enforcement and the intelligence community, and we have not seen misuse of this data.
This is what is so worrisome, that the hackers, I don't know if they're simply mischievous or if they're holding the data until it is useful. But I want to say again that I don't see how OPM can do anything but recommend to the President that there be lifetime protection. Look, this protection may never be used. That is to say, it may never cost the government much. It's like an insurance policy. So I must say that the very least we owe federal employees, given this breach, it would seem to me, is lifetime protection for data that cannot be changed. I appreciate, do you have any real way to monitor whether or not any use is being made of this data?
Congresswoman, we are, as I said, in dialogue with the FBI, with the NCSC, the DNI, and others. We monitor those.
What obligation would you be under to inform an employee were you to find that use has been made? How would that work?
We would work with those bureaus to understand the right way to inform them. We've also continued to remind—
There's no protocol yet for what to do?
We continue to remind employees about the opportunity to sign up for the monitoring services. The levels of penetration of people signing up for those services far exceeds what we've seen in the private sector context.
No, but see, that's not my question. My question is, you discover that some use has been made. What do you then do?
That's why we need to work with law enforcement. We need to understand the nature of how that data is being used to take the appropriate actions.
I don't have much time. I hope during your time that an actual protocol is set up for immediate notification in some way that the employee can be further protected. Look, I'm interested in the fact that 60% of the investigations are done by contractors. I understand perhaps the reason why, but I noted that one of the contractors, Anthem, which is not discussed as much, had jurisdiction over federal health insurance for federal employees, and 80 million Americans, information on 80 million Americans was breached. And of course, that's very, very personal information, but that they declined to let U.S. CERT investigate the breach. I can't understand that. These people are acting in the place of the government. Shouldn't they provide, the people who provide these services, have the sensitive information, be required to institute equivalent security measures, including having someone equivalent to the government or the government come in to investigate a breach?
Congressman, we are working with our health insurance partners like Anthem on how to enhance their cybersecurity and our visibility into that. We're working on that with our Inspector General.
I mean, these people work for the government. Why wasn't U.S. CERT allowed to investigate a breach of federal employee data? Why isn't that routine?
Congressman, those are the kinds of clauses we are looking to implement going forward. The Anthem incident and the Anthem contract predated my time at OPM, but I know the health insurance part of OPM with our senior cybersecurity advisor, Cliff Triplett, is working and in discussion with those insurers today about how to do.
You believe that there should be an investigation by the government or by an independent auditor when there is a breach by one of these contractors. Is that the case?
I believe that we need to bring the best resources we can to bear on these situations, and we need to put in place clear processes that reflect the challenges that we face today, and that's what we're working to do.
Mr. Chairman, I wish we could get an answer to that question. I understand she's new, but if the contractor cannot be investigated in the same way that, for example, the IG will investigate a similar breach of a federal agency, then I think we have a problem. I think we ought to give her time, but I think that question needs to be answered one way or the other with respect to contractors.
I concur. I think this, if they're going to be allowed and are given access, whether they're a contractor or employee, the IG ought to be able to investigate it, not just create this fictitious firewall and say, oh, you can't look over here. We saw this at the Department of Education. They have 184 databases, and yet nobody's looking at them. And so I would agree, and I think this is a good bipartisan thing that we can push. We've brought this up previously with Ms. Cobert, and you can see the frustration that we see, and we need an actual solution to this problem and challenge. I know you're new, but we need that. And I also want to follow up with Mr. Russell here. We, as a federal government, has spent $525 billion plus over the last 7 years, and our IT doesn't work. And that's a tremendous frustration, to have to grab money away from our troops to clean up a problem that should have never been there in the first place. Again, part of the frustration. And I do hope in the similar vein we can work in a bipartisan way to understand where the funding component comes, and that this be of the utmost priority. But to grab it out of the troops' budget is probably the last place we should do that. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Sure.
You know, as I'm listening to you, Mr. Chairman, and I guess this would be for you, Ms. Scott, I'm not sure. Is it that the IT system is so huge that we can't get it together? You follow what I'm saying? In other words, is it too big to improve? You follow me?
Yeah, well, let me talk about the case generally across the federal government, and we've heard from every CIO that getting the funding to go replace any of these large systems has not been something they've been able to do in their normal budgeting process. It's why we put together the Cyber National Action Plan.
Wait a sec. You're getting more than $80 billion a year, and that ain't enough?
No, there's a lot of money, but the easiest money to get is money to sustain the old legacy systems that get more expensive every year because of lack of skills on old COBOL systems. The security that you put around those is more costly. And the hardest money to get is money to go develop new ones. It's why we've proposed the IT Modernization Fund that would give agencies access to the capital they need to go replace these things. And it's a core part of the CNAP plan that we've put together.
I got to recognize the gentleman from Florida, but I think that's hogwash. You've asked for about $3 billion, and yet you've had $525 billion over the last 7 years. To suggest we're just $3 billion away from actually solving this problem is ridiculous. And you're spending 70% of the budget on the legacy systems, only 30% investing in new systems, and even the procurement.
It's worse than that.
Yeah, there's a talent portion to all that, but I don't think it's been a lack of funding. $80 billion a year. This is not a funding issue. You get one good trip to Best Buy, and you could do better than we're doing now. That's the concern. So let me recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mike,
Chairman.
5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If the gentleman from Florida would just withhold for 1 second. I share the Chairman's concern, and I would simply suggest to him that one of the things I think we need to do, because the statistic gets bandied about, well, we're spending 70 or 80% maintaining legacy systems. I think our committee ought to drill down on that, and I think one way we do that, and Mr. Scott can help us here, let's actually get an inventory, agency by agency, of what we're talking about, so we have a better handle on that, and it would allow us then, in some depth, to work with agencies about, well, what would it take to replace these things? Why are they costing so much money?
And I would agree with that. One of the reasons I called for the dismissal of Ms. Seymour is for years, the Inspector General had been asking for an inventory. The Office of Personnel Management went for years, didn't even know how many laptops and how many ports. And I mean, how can you solve the problem? You don't even know the inventory is. Yeah. I mean, and so I totally agree with the gentleman from Virginia. This is part of the problem. This is why when you have years of an Inspector General saying it's better to unplug the system than to continue on, we have to heed those.
I thank my friend from Florida for his courtesy. And
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the opportunity, and I still don't like Newt Gingrich for what he did to me, but made me chairman of the Subcommittee on Civil Service for 4 years. And I thought we had problems then. And actually, those were our glory days. I think we've reached the absolute bottom of the pit. I wish you well, Ms. Cobert. It's just unbelievable. I was just thinking the money we've spent. I've worked with the gentleman from Virginia on consolidation of IT systems. And I think we did, Jerry, a hearing. Are y'all still doing your retirement processing for federal employees by hand?
We are working to...
Are you doing them by hand?
Some more elements of it are digital, but much of it is manual still.
That was it's manual. Jerry, they spent $250 million setting that up, and then now they're still doing it by hand. That's not what this hearing is about, but you take it whether it's... this is about security clearance reform. My God, they're putting in this system, which is at the expense of DOD, and it's going to be in place when? Can somebody tell me? You're doing the IT part of it? October? When? Hello?
The system will start being built in 17 and hopefully by...
So it's not till 17?
Yes,
okay.
sir.
What's the backlog now? You have 388,000 new background investigations pending. Is that right, Ms. Colbert? And I have 117 periodic reinvestigations backlogged, 500,000. And the IT system is going to be in place in 17? Well,
Congressman,
it's a backlog. I mean, that's what staff is giving me. I just
the figures I have on the backlog, we think about the backlog in terms of the timeliness for doing those investigations.
It's
so, yes.
500,000 backlogs right now. We don't have a system in place. I really even don't know where to start. If I was doing something, I'd probably look at putting some there are plenty of people that can conduct these investigations. There are companies that do that. Can you contract with some of those folks? Can we get this in bite size. You can only eat an elephant a bite at a time, I'm told.
So, Congressman, we have systems that support background investigations today. We have made strides over the last month in making those more secure, and then we're going to rebuild them.
They're building you this system, and then you're going to run it?
No, DOD will operate the new systems. We are currently running the existing systems.
And who's going to conduct the investigations?
The investigations will be
By this new agency?
will be conducted by the National Background Investigation Bureau.
Folks, hang on to your shorts on this one. But by the time you get the IT in place and the money you're going to spend, and then by the time you get OPM up and running, I mean, you can't even get the personnel to do the manual processing of the retirement. I think we're headed for another disaster. God bless you, but I'm telling you, you got to take this a bite at a time. You need to get contracts out. You need to get it out of OPM. Building this system, it is designed to fail. We'll be back here in the next Congress in 17. I guarantee you, and put that in the record, it's a new word, that this will continue to be a disaster, the way it sounds like you're putting it together. I haven't even gotten into the issue of our personal records being hacked. Where are we on that? I mean, I got a notice that mine were hacked. What, have you taken protections for all of us? I don't know if I signed up for whatever you offered, but we have millions of records hacked in OPM. What's the status of that?
We have, working with DOD, been through a process to notify individuals
I've been
whose records.
notified. What's the remedy? I mean,
So there's services
yeah, and
available.
I just started getting this week. I started getting scam calls from different groups that I've never gotten before at home. Member of Congress. What's the status of protecting me? And okay, let's not even do me, but we've got hundreds of thousands of federal employees out there.
So we have provided these services. We have notified individuals and repeated that they have the opportunity to enroll.
So we have to sign up. You've taken nothing preemptive to help us.
These services are in place. For you to receive the monitoring services, you have to provide your personally identifiable information, and we cannot legally do that on your behalf.
I don't trust giving you any more of my information. It's already been hacked and people have it. I just want to know what we're doing to preemptively to help people who have been hacked, who have worked for the federal government or are working for the federal government.
We have provided them services. We have provided them information about how they can protect themselves.
Well, I think
and we are working with them to the extent they have an issue to help restore their identity.
Come back with another plan and look at what I suggested. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back and I'll be back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the panelists for helping the committee with its work. The standard Form 86 is very, very, very extensive and very thorough. And it goes into a person's entire history, their family, very, very in-depth investigation. That's what was hacked in many cases with respect to the hacks against OPM. And when Ms. Archuleta and Ms. Seymour were here last time, I asked them point blank if any of that information was encrypted, and the answer was no. We didn't. We gathered all of this information at OPM, put it in one repository, and then did not encrypt it. So we basically invited people to come in and hack and basically get all the information. There were no firewalls or anything like that. So it was just colossally bad management. Now we're going. I support the move to DOD because you've got at least some record of protecting information. It's in the vital interest of this country to do so. Are we going to be able to move that information over and secure it? I know a lot of it's already been hacked, but what's the next step on that, Mr. Halverson?
Yes, sir. We will move the information over. We'll use the proper levels of encryption on all the levels of the data and have a leveled and layered defense of all of that data, and it will be physically and virtually inside the DoD boundaries.
Okay. And so there are about 4 million Americans that have security clearance. That's both federal employees and contractors. And there's about 600,000 a year that we're issuing new clearances to. I would like to think that the idea that by October of 2017, is that what we're talking about? When the system is going to be up and running? Or is it 16?
We will have the system begin running, yes, in October of 16. It will not be completed by October of 16, but we will begin to execute new parts of that system in October of 16. It will take the following year to complete that, given the complexity of the system.
I just think that that's happy talk. With all due respect, with the problems we're having with pensions, and I used to chair the subcommittee on federal employees, and we've had long-standing problems with that. I just think that's, like I say, happy talk. That's just dream world stuff. We've had terrible problems with just getting basic information up and running. We're still doing stuff manually, as the gentleman from Florida pointed out. But interestingly enough, the only stuff that hasn't been hacked is the stuff that we're doing by hand. And I'm sure that's not intentional, but that just demonstrates the weakness of our system. Let me ask you, is there any value, because if someone's going through this top secret clearance process, that's an important role. And if they're looking for that type of clearance, we have a concomitant duty, I think, to make sure that person is thoroughly vetted, and I agree with that. But is it necessary to have all those folks online and to have the ability of one person sit down and get access to all of them? Or is there an opportunity to have some type of firewall, Ms. Cobert?
Congressman, we have taken steps already to move in the direction you're describing. We have put in place more advanced firewalls. We have increased the segmentation of the data. We have improved encryption. We are not finished, but we are working towards that. And as we think about the redesign of the system, and I'm sure Terry could talk more about it, the question you're posing about who needs to have access to what elements of the data, how do we store it effectively, how do we allow people what they need from a business operation perspective to interact with the data, but have it in a much more segmented way, is part of the future design. We've put in remedial measures on the current systems. We have much better firewalls. We have much more stringent criteria for access to that data. So we've done the things that we need to do within the existing systems, but we fundamentally need to build them with security by design built in, and that is what our partners from DoD are going to help us do.
Okay, one last point. The recently passed omnibus bill that the President signed says that, in relevant part, the enhanced personnel security program of an agency shall integrate social media. So shall means shall. And so all this hedging is contrary to congressional intent.
Congressman, we are actively working to do that. Today on the SF-86, it requires folks to put their email address and aliases. We are working closely with the DNI to put that in place.
Okay.
The pilots that DoD has been running on continuous evaluation, for example, do incorporate social media, and we're learning from those pilots.
This is not the general public, so there should be no hedging. These people want top security clearance in many cases. We have, and that's fair enough, but we obviously have the obligation to vet these people if they're getting this top secret clearance. That's all I'm saying.
We share that commitment, Congressman, and I'm sure the DNI shares that as well.
Thank you. I yield back.
And before the gentleman yields back, maybe what we should do is take all the data and put it on an Apple iPhone, because evidently that's encrypted. That'd be a heck of a lot cheaper than trying to recreate what Apple's evidently able to do. So just an idea. We'll now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony. Thank you for your work. Mr. Halverson, let me come to you because, as I understand it, you're the CIO and you report to whom?
I report to the Secretary of Defense.
And so as we go to implement this new process, it is your responsibility, the funding, you make the decisions. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then help me understand, because OPM has a relationship here, so how, now that it's your decision and we're going to pay for it through OPM, how do the two of those work together? Because it seems like the funding stream now is going to be, I guess, separated, so to speak.
Very clear. The funding stream that we've talked about in the $95 billion is for the build of the new system. It is not the entire funding stream for the operation of the NBIB.
So Ms. Cobert has the funding for the operation?
The funding for the operations of the Federal Investigative Service is a fee-for-service operation. So DOD, when it requests a security clearance, pays the Federal Investigative Service and will pay the NBIB as that bureau is stood up to conduct the investigation. So the funding for the investigations we do for DOD actually comes from DOD. The fundings we do for other federal agencies come from them. It is a revolving fund model as opposed to an appropriated model.
All right, so how does that affect oversight, and really as we start to look at it, because when it gets in to be a fee-for-service, why would they contract with OPM? Is that a contract they have to have with OPM, or can they go to an outside source? I mean, you see where I'm going with this, the potential conflict.
Sure. The agreements we have in place, the way will be structured with the NBIB is that the NBIB will conduct the background investigations for DOD and other agencies as we do today. We charge them a price for those investigations, and even today, we work closely with DOD as our largest customer and with the other PAC agencies around pricing. We want to make sure we're doing a quality job, but we're doing it in a way that is a smart use of taxpayer dollars.
Well, and I see that. I guess, Ms. Cobert, one of the concerns I have is when you have monies that are going to OPM versus an outside contractor or whomever it may be, the accountability, it's kind of like having a general contractor that has subcontractors that are, who's ultimately, if the job is not done correctly, who does that fall to? Does it fall to Mr. Halverson or to you? And
the operations and the investigative operations will be housed in OPM. They will report to me. I will be accountable.
All right. So how do you anticipate how, if it's a fee for service, how do you get the appropriations to make sure you're properly staffed to be able to help? Because again, it becomes a model that becomes extremely tricky. It's operating like a private sector, but yet you're not.
Again, the model that was put in place to have a fee-for-service model is because the agencies who are the ultimate customers of background investigations fund those. They are, in fact, demanding customers. When we work with DOD today, we have an ongoing dialogue about what are we doing with their funds, how are we carrying that through. Agencies' demands for background investigations are somewhat unpredictable. They give us expectations, but their level of demand for background investigation is a result of their activity, and so they pay for those, and we use those funds.
Okay, so why would we not just say, okay, Ms. Cobert, you have all the authority? Why do we do this back and forth fee aspect of it? Because it just seems like a shell game where we're moving it from one area to the other. And why wouldn't we just say, you're responsible, you're accountable from an oversight, appropriations, and everything else? This back and forth becomes very problematic.
We are responsible for the use of the revolving funds in our congressional budget justification. We talk about the amount of the revolving funds that we anticipate using in FY17. We work the pricing through with our interagency partners, so we are responsible for the spending of those funds. The amount that we put to work in the revolving fund is part of our budget submission.
But do you see my point that if he comes back and he says, well, I only had demand for X number of, it creates a problem for you instead of, do you follow me?
That is an exact issue we have, and that is why we work with agencies to understand what are their projections, what are they doing, what do they need. We do want agencies to actually understand what it takes to do this. And I think this structure works well from that perspective. But part of standing this entity up. We've done some excellent work with the CAPE group at DOD about how to fund this, and we are going to continue to look at that, and I'm happy to continue that dialogue as we go forward.
Okay, I'm out of time. I want to remind all of you that Mr. Conley and I are going to be looking very closely at FTARA, and while I have you here, I want to emphasize it once again. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me take up where my friend from North Carolina left off. We're going to follow up on FTARA.
Our FTARA plan has been approved by OMB.
And conveniently, Ms. Cobert, we have OMB right here. But I do think there's bipartisan consensus on a lot of the IT aspects of federal management, and that may not last forever. But we're working hand in glove and seamlessly in this committee and our two subcommittees with respect to that, and I pray you take advantage of that, because anything can happen, you know. Mr. Halverson, I think you had a personal loss in your family. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
And you were supposed to be at an event with us the other day, and all of us, everybody there wanted to convey their sympathy to you and your family.
Thank you, and I appreciate the schedulings you've made.
We understand perfectly, of course, and I hope your family's doing okay. And Ms. Cobert, congratulations in bringing us together. Hopefully it will have some effect in the other body. But it is, and I commend the chairman and the ranking member, it's especially if we're as concerned as we say we are about the breach at OPM, the last thing in the world we need is any cloud at all over the legitimacy or status of the head of OPM. And so I would pray our colleagues in the other body confirm you as swiftly as possible. There is no substantive reason not to do that, and I know you've been working very hard in your acting capacity to try to deal with some very heavy baggage with respect to breaches. And I will say, I know my friend from Florida was expressing some frustration, but I also am one of the victims. My experience with the service provided so far has been very positive.
Thank you.
They've caught things we didn't know about. In fact, frankly, they're so strict, there are times, you know, my wife can't always respond in my name to the concerns. So they're pretty tight. So hopefully that's the experience of others as well. And as I've told you privately, we have 20-something million victims through no fault of their own. And priority number one of OPM and you, as the director, is to protect those victims and make them as whole as we can. So, and I know you share that goal as well. Mr. Halverson, I'm looking at the Bureau's cyber infrastructure and the new plans. And the Office of the Secretary issued this statement, that the purpose of the new design and build for that infrastructure is to avert or eliminate the continuous and dynamic threat of identity theft, financial espionage, other attacks on personal information, while providing a secure basis for background investigations necessary for the federal government. Can you briefly describe the mission of the Defense Information Systems Agency and why it was selected to design and operate that new system to meet that goal?
DISA is the DOD's both contract acquisition and design agency for major systems in IT. In my review of the capabilities, DISA was best positioned to be the oversight and designer of this. I will stress, however, when we say DISA is the designer of this system, it will not be without lots of input and, in some cases, commercial adaptation of technology.
Will this new network or system deploy Einstein sensors for protection?
It will deploy the right set of sensors. Could be Einstein, it could be Einstein equivalents or things that might be better than Einstein as we're looking at the future. As you well know, this is a field that changes rapidly. There will not be a single system that does this, but an integrated layer of systems that are better integrated to talk and both stop attacks, but if they happen, to identify them and quarantine them quickly. That takes a layered defense system.
I'm going to run out of time, and if the chairman will allow them to respond, I will, of course, give up my time. But Ms. Cobert and Ms. Halverson, when the breach occurred, one of the things we were told was, well, OPM had deployed Einstein 1 and Einstein 2, but not Einstein 3. And had it had Einstein 3 in place, maybe the breach would have been mitigated or eliminated. I'd like both of you to comment on that, because I think there's a lot of confusion up here, which I share. Well, is Einstein the answer, or is there some other answer? Are there things at DOD that are not yet available in the civilian agencies that should be? Or help us a little bit with that. Do we still stand by that analysis?
Congressman, what I can tell you is we continue to be moving forward with deploying the Einstein capabilities as they become available. So we have been moving forward with Einstein 3 and Einstein 3A. From my perspective at OPM, as a customer of the support that folks like DOD and DHS can provide, I am happy to be an early adopter of the smart tools as they make them available to us. And whichever are the best tools, and folks like Mr. Halverson will help us figure out what those are the ones we will deploy.
I think Beth got it right, sir, and I think, we will continually review this. We've had recent reviews frankly, done on behalf of what I've asked, NSA and some commercial groups to say these are the best layered defenses today. Einstein technology will be part of that, but it is not the singular answer to build the best defense system forward.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scott, just out of curiosity, will the President's appointee to the NBIB be confirmed by the Senate?
As proposed, I don't believe so, sir.
Do you know how that process will be? Is it just an appoint? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Colbert, let me go back to you. As you know, the PAC conducted the review after the Navy Yard shooting. That review led to 13 specific recommendations to improve clearance, the clearance process. Has the intelligence community fully complied and addressed those recommendations?
Congressman, the PAC collectively has been working to implement the full set of recommendations from the review following the Navy Yard. In my prior role at OMB, when I was the chair of the PAC, in my current role as acting director of OPM, we've been working closely with our colleagues from the DNI, for example, to put in place pilots of continuous evaluation, to implement new federal investigative standards, to improve access.
So are you saying they have or have not been fully implemented?
We are working through the process. The timetable for full implementation is not, we're still in that process, but we are actively working that and actively managing it through the PAC.
So it's not yet been fully implemented, and you do not have a time frame when that would be complete?
There are different time frames for different elements. So one of the elements was to actually have continuous evaluation pilots in place. We have those in place. DOD has done some that's covered hundreds of thousands of people. The investigative standards.
All right, can you give us a general time frame?
Some of the elements are already due. Some last till 2017. I am happy to provide you. We report on
Please provide that, and
performance.
let's carry on. But please provide that information.
Happy to do that, sir.
The Navy Yard shooter had multiple previous arrests, and yet was still somehow able to obtain clearance. How can this be?
Congressman, there are real challenges in getting complete and comprehensive records from local law enforcement. Some of those are due to the challenges that the local law enforcement has in their own record.
Okay, there's been recommendations to work and improve that process with state and local criminal records. When is that process going to improve?
That process has seen improvement. I can cite examples from New York City, from, we track actually.
I don't want examples. I want when are we going to see that enormous gap closed?
We are continuing to work with law enforcement. The records are their records. Things like Congress gave us with the NDAA that gives background investigators greater access to records that was implemented last year will be one step in helping us, but we have to work this through with local law enforcement to make sure they've got the systems.
That's the whole point. The local law enforcement, when is that relationship going to be resolved so that information can be readily made available so that we don't have people like the Navy Yard shooter
Congressman, we are working actively with local law enforcement. In fact, we had a task force, and we are going to continue that.
That's a really cheap answer. We're working actively, and yet, please provide that for us. I want as much specifics as you can provide without rambling on this issue.
I'm happy to provide you that.
All right, have the revised 2012 federal investigative standards been fully implemented?
We have implemented those through Tier 3. The rest of them are on schedule to be implemented over the next year and two, I believe. I don't have the specific timeline, but we have implemented the Tier 3, for example, this fall.
Okay. Another recommendation involved the detection of false information that was submitted by applicants. As you may recall, Snowden, for example, said that he had worked for the U.S. government for 6 years. Investigators and all that never contacted any co-workers. They never got any further details. The Navy Yard shooter had serious mental health problems. What is being done to verify applicants' information more complete and in a more effective manner?
So there's a number of steps that we've put in place to increase the accuracy. I can go through the specifics and probably get that back to you in terms of each of those elements, because that involves work with the different agencies. I don't have the details of that right here. But I can get that to you.
Doesn't it seem that that would be information that you would have?
I want to make sure that my response to you is accurate in terms of exactly the specifics of the progress we've made, sir.
Okay, when we're talking about applicants putting false information and no one checking it, that seems like that would be information, if it's being corrected, that would be right on the top of your head. I would appreciate you getting that information to us ASAP. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the congressman from California, and I appreciate his efforts on this issue. Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The hearings last year in the Oversight Committee exposed fundamental weaknesses in our nation's IT infrastructure, specifically as applied to OPM. And thank you, Mr. Scott, for doing the 100-day cybersecurity sprint last year. The director of the OPM last year resigned to be replaced by Ms. Cobert, and you've been doing a terrific job given the situation you've been put in. And last October, Representative Russell and I wrote a letter to administration to the PAC board saying you need to move the security clearance IT system to the Department of Defense. And I'm very pleased to read in your testimony, Ms. Cobert, that in fact the Department of Defense, with its unique national security perspective, will design, build, secure, and operate the security clearance IT system. My question has to do more with the other aspect of your plan, which is now the creation of a new bureau, the National Background Investigations Bureau. And I share some of the concerns raised by Congressman Russell. And my first question has to do with the wiring diagram. My understanding is this bureau will be headed by a presidential appointee who then reports to the head of, director of OPM. So Ms. Cobert, could you or the new director fire that person?
I imagine I could, yes, sir.
Okay. What happens if you have a disagreement with the Department of Defense over how to do the security clearance IT system?
Congressman, as Mr. Halverson said, DOD has the responsibility for the security of the IT systems. We have given that responsibility in agreement with them because we want to rely on their expertise. They have the national security expertise, the cybersecurity expertise around these issues. That they are in that place because of that expertise, and we would expect that their guidance on how those things should operate is what we would follow.
And if they want more money to do the IT system upgrades and so on, where would that money come from?
So let me distinguish between the budget funding for the IT upgrades, as Mr. Halverson has described, as well as the funding for the ongoing support for NBIB. The funding for NBIB, because it is a fee-for-service model, are fees paid for our customers. The largest customer of the National Background Investigations Bureau will be the Department of Defense. And so, in fact, DOD will be providing those funds to the NBIB through the payments that they make for background investigation services. So they are both the customer paying the bill, as well as the individuals who will be supporting the use of those funds on IT for the revolving nature of the funds.
Okay. In terms of personnel, my understanding is the Federal Information Service will be folded or basically replaced with this new bureau. Will there be less people, the same, or more?
Congressman, I don't have the answer to that question at the moment. We are working with NBIB to make it purpose-built for this mission, for the scale of this mission, for the new capabilities, and frankly, the new operating practices that are going to be part of it. In addition to the IT redesign that DOD will be leaving, a key part of the transition team and the ongoing efforts is business process reengineering. How do we take advantage of these new technology tools to make this process be better, be smarter, be more efficient? And so when we put those together, we can't tell you today what the scale of the individuals involved will be.
And taking a step back, what's the reason for not continuing with the Federal Information Service? Why do we need this new bureau?
Beyond the changes in how we operate IT, which are significant, in particular given the IT intensity of this activity, that is a very significant change. But what we wanted to do with the other change is to elevate the mission, elevate this role by having a presidential appointee lead it in conjunction with the PAC as a peer of those leaders. We want to make sure that it has more dedicated support, custom tailored to this mission, to make sure we can address the privacy issues with a national security context, to make sure that it's got greater dedicated resources for the specific and unique type of contracting activity that it does, or the legal issues it confronts, or the other key elements of its operation. So we wanted that dedicated support, and we wanted to make sure we could institutionalize the interagency collaboration that really works. We work closely through the PAC with the IC, with the Department of Justice, with the FBI, and that will be embedded in how the NBIB operates.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Evanina, what sort of records do current continuous evaluation pilot programs look at?
Well, sir, I can speak for the Intelligence Community and Office Director of National Intelligence. We're looking at about 7 or 8 major databases that will be continuously evaluated to identify areas of concern for clearance holders that currently exist and on a continuous basis. So, for instance, right now, background investigations that are reinvestigations occur either 5-year or 10-year cycle. We're looking to facilitate that on a continuous basis. So, for instance, if you have an incident tonight, a domestic dispute, an arrest, or a financial issue like bankruptcy, we'll identify that immediately and not have to wait for 5 years to do that. But there'll be automated checks on a recurring basis.
Would you be able to follow up on something like with the Mr. Alexis, where he showed that he lived in Seattle but worked in Manhattan? Would it pick up discrepancies like that?
Probably not specifically where he resides, but the requests for public information of residency would be part of that documentation. However, what happened with the law enforcement issue in the West Coast would not be part of that. It would be financial records, travel records, and publicly available records on the Internet.
The personnel that are looking at these documents, does it not make sense to train them to look for abnormalities like that? I mean, to say that you live in Seattle and you work in Manhattan should at least ask someone if they're commuting.
Absolutely, sir. And I'm confident that it happens now when investigations are conducted on background investigations and reinvestigations periodically with their 5 and 10-year period. Those investigators who conduct those investigations are robust and thorough, and they would ask that question, sir.
Mr. Halverson, what records does the DOD pilot program look at?
Sir, all of the same records, plus we are looking at financial. We're working with law enforcement to do some criminal and sex offender. We look at social media, other internet public records, and internal DOD data sources.
I want to go back to Mr. Evanina. Given that it's been almost a decade, why is the continuous evaluation not yet a standard practice in the intelligence, across the intelligence agencies?
Sir, I'll proffer that. A lot of agencies in the intelligence community currently utilize continuous evaluation.
You said a lot of them, but why is it not standard practice across all of them?
I'll correct that. Majority, if not all, the organizations in the intelligence community currently use continuous evaluation. We are working with partners here to promulgate that across the executive branch of the government.
I appreciate that it's a majority, but can we get to all?
Yes, sir. I'll get you specifics as to which agencies don't, if there is such an agency that does not conduct that now.
Thank you, sir. I want to go back to Mr. Halverson. Is the information looked at under the pilot program different from what would be looked at under the periodic reinvestigations of the current standard practice?
The data is different, and that's part of what we're trying to pilot. There are some additional data sources in the pilots, and that's what we're evaluating now to see if that makes more sense in a continual way in cooperation with our intelligence counterparts.
When will all of the DOD's cleared population be covered by the continuous evaluation program?
Sir, I think there are two questions there. Right now, the DOD, we do use continuous monitoring. We are still in the process of working with the intelligence community of when that will become the standard for periodic investigations.
I want to shift gears a little bit here. Ms. Cobert, at your Senate nomination hearing, you said that the changing nature of cybersecurity, excuse me, means we all need to change the way we interact, the way we use systems at work and at home. You then explained that you yourself cannot access your personal Gmail account from your OPM computer because that's the way a lot of threats come in. Can you expand on how access to private accounts like personal webmail or on agency computers compromises the integrity of the federal information systems?
Certainly. Whether it's phishing attempts or other things, there are lots of ways things come in. Those may not have the same screens and filters that we have on our own government emails. And so the policy that we've put in place at OPM is to restrict access to those personal accounts. You don't want individuals being able to click on those accounts and accidentally click on something as a phishing attempt, for example. We know about the security controls on our own systems. We don't know about the security controls on individuals' personal emails. Therefore, we do not want them on OPM computers.
Okay, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the panelists for the hard and engaged work you're in the process of. Certainly, I think we can all agree that this was a very important issue, and the OPM data breach was alarming, to say the least. So my questions and comments are going to be more directed at that, understanding where responsibility lies, sort of consistent with some of the comments by Mr. Meadows, understanding that this wasn't an isolated incident and it was sophisticated and coordinated, and those kind of things are going to continue to happen in our new world. So I have a couple of slides. If we could put the first one up. Speaking of technology, our committee investigations found that cyber attackers used a sophisticated kind of malware called PlugX. Slide 2, please. The cyber attackers targeted government contractors with access to large amounts of personal information about federal employees. These contractors, as you can see in the slide, were KeyPoint, which connected to OPM for the background investigation work it does, Anthem and Primera, which provide insurance to millions of federal employees and their families. Slide 3, please. Once they hacked into KeyPoint, as we've now learned, the attackers were able to disguise their movements to appear to be authorized users inside OPM's networks. Once they get in, they installed PlugX, malware on OPM's networks as well. Slide 4, please. This is the last slide. Over a period of months in 2015, the attackers made off with personal information they found using this method. In all, again alarming, over 90 million people could have been affected by this breach. Mr. Scott, at the committee's first hearing, that's the last slide, thank you, On the OPM data breach on June 16th of last year, your written testimony stated, and I quote, "Both state and non-state actors who are well-financed, highly motivated, are persistently attempting to breach both government and non-government systems, and these attempts are not going away. They will continue to accelerate on two dimensions. First, the attacks will continue to become more sophisticated, as we've seen, and secondly, as we remediate and strengthen our own practices, our detection capabilities will improve." So it's a constant effort. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate, given your experience, the sophistication of the cyber attackers responsible for the breaches of Keypoint, Anthem, and OPM in 2015?
I think there's consensus among all of us who looked at this that it's in the upper ranges. I'd say 8 or 9 in that range.
Thank you. Ms. Director Cobert, our understanding is that cyber attacks against OPM were underway in 2013 and 2014, and they were only detected in 2015 when new tools deployed by former CIO Donna Seymour came online. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes, sir.
In your opinion, could OPM have prevented these attacks with the tools it had in 2013?
The tools we had in 2013 are very different. Were not adequate to prevent the breach. The breach occurred, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So in the overall context, this is the constantly trying to stay ahead of things, and that OPM was trying to stay ahead, but the tools they had weren't sophisticated enough to stop it, so we slid behind. Mr. Halverson, the committee's investigation revealed that the adversary behind these attacks, again, were sophisticated and persistent and will continue to be. As these breaches illustrate, the adversary can be and will be present in the network, laying low and being invisible largely to us. Knowing that we all have a lot of confidence in DOD, and knowing it's not misplaced, I think, at a bipartisan level, and knowing that you can't explain everything in the sophistication that you bring to this endeavor, the molding between you and OPM is important. So could you just briefly describe, with obviously being sensitive to the classified issues that you deal, what do you bring in a nutshell to this effort that will give us a higher level of confidence?
Well, I think, first of all, DOD, we live with a volume of attacks, and I won't go into the specific numbers. I think you've seen them. They're very, very large every day, from everything ranging from the less talented to the most extreme talented adversaries. Our integration across DOD and how we deal with that, both in preventing them, but also, and I want to stress, if people keep attacking, I don't think we're all going to have a perfect system of prevention. Our ability to quickly detect, isolate, quarantine, and take corrective action and protect the forensics is something we will bring to this table, and probably the integration of all of that and being able to produce a better full environment is what DOD brings to the table.
Well, I just want to thank you all. You're a group of federal employees that when you're doing your job well, nobody hears from you. So congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We do appreciate the panel and their efforts. I would like to just make some closing comments that the fee for service, while it is understood that you have users and the compensation should come from those that use, but could you please explain, whoever would like to address it, where you have $95 million now that will come from Department of Defense, and yet Department of Defense will still be required to do a fee for service for their own users. So not only do they get to pay again. They have complete responsibility, but they don't have the authority. Is that accurate?
Congressman, the $95 million request in the budget was to deal with the modernization and move to a new model. That is some will think of that as more the one-time investment that we need to make on behalf of the entire federal government, and because DOD will be doing that work on behalf of the government, the funds were put into the DOD budget. On an ongoing basis, it is our responsibility, working with DOD, to make the overall operations and systems work well. DOD, as Terry has stated, will be the lead, will have authority for the decisions around the systems. We will then, at OPM through the NBIB and with our interagency partners, be deploying those systems every day to conduct the work. So DOD will be building and operating the systems, securing the systems. At NBIB, we will be using those systems to conduct the investigations, and the fees from agencies support that work so that we have the funding to get it done. It means we can scale that as the demand changes.
And I understand that, and I appreciate that, Director Cobert, but here, I mean, doesn't it stand to reason that if you're the one providing the service, you ought not to charge yourself to perform it? Would you agree with that statement? The Department of Defense will be conducting what amounts to its own background usage, and yet now you're also requiring a fee for them to perform their own service. Is that correct?
The Department of Defense will be provisioning the IT system. The individual investigators, the work that's done in using those systems will be done by the NBIB. So they are our IT provider. We are the users, and that's what the fees cover.
Okay, but herein is the concern. While you have, a great reputation, and, as you've heard in the comments in committee today, good bipartisan, commendation for your efforts, all of that could change in a year. The whole team that we see, although they're longstanding public servants, and we appreciate that service, if we don't set this structure up correctly, and as we heard by admission from Mr. Scott today, this funding is going to come from the top line of defense. Well, gee, as I've already illustrated, that amounts to about 60,000 soldiers' pay. This is a problem because we're trying to set up a system that will have competing interests, that will go against something that comes top line from defense, and then it appears that the Department of Defense, which will have much of the legwork and will provide much of the sweat equity, so to speak, they will also be asked to pay for their own labor.
Congressman, I'm not sure I agree with the competing interest point. DOD is our largest customer. We are providing services to DOD. They, as our customer, and I can attest today, they are a very demanding customer, want to make sure that we do a quality job, that NBIB will do a quality job, and that NBIB does that in a quality way, but in an efficient way. We have dialogues with them today about pricing. This activity does have to happen across the federal government. It is an important activity. It has a cost, and we believe that this structure of us working with DOD and our other customers puts appropriate pressure on NBIB to do it right, to do it efficiently, and that will continue. I actually view that more as an alignment of interests than a competition.
And I get that from a government function point of view, but I think the real issue here is that this is a national security issue. It has been breached. It will last, in my estimation, at least 2 generations. There is a gold mine of information whereby to track folks. And so the big concern of mine is that, from a, and I don't mean this in an unkind form, but in a technical form, from a bureaucratic view, that yes, there are government functions. But since this is such a national security issue, it stands to reason that many of the 3-letter agencies did not want to be slid under OPM when we did these reforms originally. In fact, they stiff-armed it. They didn't get breached. Department of Defense, largely through pressure of Congress and through budgets, did. Now we're turning back to them, but we're still going to keep it potentially in a convoluted authority structure. This is a defense issue. This is a national security issue. And it still begs the question of whether or not DOD should be involved in its own personnel at all under an OPM structure. And I think those questions have to continue to be asked. I'm very concerned about that, and I would just be curious, both from Mr. Evanina and also Chief Halverson, in that regard. Would we have better security for our defense personnel in a standalone, or do we need to have this amalgam of agencies with a convoluted structure, cooperation notwithstanding, that could make us vulnerable yet again in the future? Chief Halverson.
So I think what we've proposed is actually the best security solution. We are, from DOD's standpoint, in a sense, acting as the contractor for their IT services. We will provide those. We are responsible for those IT services. And I want to make a couple points. The cost for the current IT are baked into the current OPM pricing. The $95 million is to do the modernization. I actually believe when we are done the modernization, the IT cost will actually come down. This is a more effective way to do IT than what we have been doing today. The IT will be central. Everybody will use standard, the IT system. I think the same thing is true as we look at the business systems. I don't think you want DOD, Department of State, anybody else doing different things with the investigations. I think that, A, makes it more efficient, but also creates seams that could be exploited. I think we eliminate those seams. I understand your issues about, are we going to be able to get the right authorities in place? I think we are, and I think we will owe you continual updates on how we're doing that.
Mr. Evanina?
Sir, I will echo that and say that from the intelligence perspective, from the community, we believe this is the most effective and efficient manner to attack this problem. And I think it's important to bifurcate the issues here. The first half of it is the investigation is being done in the field to include federal employees and contractors, and the adjudications, which is inherently governmental, by the folks at the NBIB. The second part of that is the systems and data that's acquired to be securely stored by DOD, we believe is the most efficient way to handle this issue, not only from a national security perspective and housing the data and ensuring it's secure through DOD, but also maintain the current rhythm and motive of doing the investigations we are currently doing now.
Well, I would like to thank the panel. We appreciate both your time and your continued efforts in this. It is appreciated. We all care about the same things. It is my sincere hope that we will work together to resolve these issues that have come up. And seeing that there is no further business, this hearing is now adjourned.
Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Mic check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Witness mic. Witness mic.
Test. Test, test. Test, test. Test.